Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. It's the 1st of December 2024. Mark Horner, Beyond 90 Seconds. Thought I'd just check in. I made a point of saying in a recent live stream that I'd like to check in more and just share with you what's going on and be available in case anybody has any questions, comments, feedback. But it's been a busy time this past month, November. So 1st of November seems like a good time just to kind of do an update and be here, present and available if you'd like to chat. So let's look back at November. Busy time. Definitely picked up the pace for the old YouTube channel. Most recently, I was just out yesterday on the last day of November, and I took my youngest son and we went down to Shadow Lake here in Snohomish, Washington. My first trip down to the lake this autumn. And that lake is a place I've gone to over the years to see trumpeter swans in the morning. By the time I got there, and I knew it was a late start, especially since the fog had basically all burned off, I knew it was a good chance the trumpeter swans were gone, and that they had already set out for the day in the nearby farm fields to forage. They spend the night at the local waterways, such as Shadow Lake. And sure enough, there was only one there. In fact, there was a guy out there on this small lake in a boat, which I did not actually expect to see. I think actually it was a kayak, and he was fishing. I had never seen a person on a boat on that small lake at the Bob Ehrman Wildlife Preserve in all the years I've been going there. But his presence likely encouraged the trumpeters to leave early that morning, I suspect. So you would think that maybe it was going to be a strikeout there at Bob Ehrman Wildlife Preserve, but rather than go back to the car, we ventured further into the preserve and walked to the Snohomish River. And once we got there, we were met with some nice views of the river. And as I glanced up at one point off to the left in the distance, I could see a deer crossing the river. There are actually two small islands. One's really small, one's not as small. And it walked across the river to the first island and then the second island. And then it swam from the second island to I guess it'd be the southern shore in that stretch of the river. And that was something else to see. It's the second time I've seen deer in the years I've been going to that area. And interesting to observe it from upriver, looking downriver at a distance of, I'm guessing, maybe a quarter mile or more, roughly that distance. And we got video of it, even though the deer was off in the distance. That was pretty cool. For locals who may wish to know even more precisely where this is, if you get on Old School Road, which is the opposite side of the river from Bob Ehrman, just before it turns to the left and takes a different road going up Lord Hill, where the miniature donkeys are, that's the area that the deer was in. So then we went back towards town, Snohomish, where my son had noticed that along the river there's a walkway. There's a big new mural on one of the old buildings that simply says Snohomish, and it has a small saying underneath it. But my son pointed that out, and that was new. And from the new boat launch across from the soccer fields in town, where all these soccer fields are located, great many fields, we could observe two bald eagles, and this is not uncommon here, perched atop one of the towers near the railroad bridge. It was the opposite side of the river. And then down below in the river, there was a guy on a skidoo or jet ski, and he was fishing and blaring music. But yeah, we had the pair of bald eagles across the river on top of the tower, and the guy, on his jet ski fishing, blasting music. And again, not unusual, a lot of sea lions. That location's about 11 miles upriver. And I've seen them further upriver, the sea lions, 14 miles upriver. But the theory is that the sea lions come up to follow the fish, the salmon, and they feast on them. And so that was good to observe. When I got back home, actually, and I was looking at the footage of the deer crossing the river, about 14 miles upriver, my wife pointed out, hey, look, something's popping its head up. And it was in the distance, so I was thinking maybe a duck, a bird of some sort. But no, it was 4K footage. I can get closer. It was definitely a sea lion that came up a couple of times while swimming in the water and popped its head out and watched the deer go across. So that was cool, and it made for a really nice final day of November. Earlier in the month, kept very busy all at once because of the so-called bomb cyclone weather event that produced a lot of wind and ultimately a lot of fallen trees here in Western Washington. And initially, I think the first video I posted wasn't shot by me. In fact, I know it wasn't. It was shot by my friend Janine up on Vancouver Island because British Columbia was impacted by this wind event too. And she sent me some video from Nanaimo of trees toppled over. And so we shared that. And somebody had commented, like, and it was just video. I didn't put any narration. It was just some video I uploaded. But the title and the description, of course, mentioned bomb cyclone, which is an actual meteorological term, if I can say it, official term. So I went ahead and used it. And somebody seemed turned off by that and said, don't sensationalize. This was a typical storm. Well, I'm here to tell you, the more the days followed that bomb cyclone, the more, at least here in Western Washington, I can tell you with certainty it was not a typical storm. It was a very, very, very severe wind event. And ultimately, Ben Yurkovic shared on X, formerly Twitter, local weather chaser here on social media, that up here in Snohomish County on OK Mill Road, there was a stretch where he guesstimated at least 100 trees had fallen. So it was the following day. I went up there with my camera, my video camera, as well as my still camera. And I found this stretch, and it was absolutely amazing. It's a word that's used all too lightly and often, but it really was amazing to see so many large trees up there toppled over. Prior to going up there, I had already been into town here in Snohomish and shot video and shared on YouTube where a large tree had fallen on a historic house built in 1892 on Avenue B, 400 block here in Snohomish. The trees up there on OK Mill Road, most of those, there were many trees that were much larger than the one that fell on the house here in Snohomish. In fact, one was so large that, as the tree falls over, the root structure is now revealed, and it's like at a 90-degree angle and straight up. I guesstimate one of those root structures was perhaps 30 feet tall. It was amazing. It felt like I was in, as I mentioned at the time, like in Jurassic times. Everything was just bigger. But what was so strange and what really made the impression is that you had what I would estimate to be at least a 100-yard stretch of forest. I'm not sure by how many yards wide, but it was in terms of the direction of the road, which I think was still east to west in that particular area. It was a stretch like an alleyway of just cleared forest where the wind had come seemingly from the directions of the mountains and knocked those trees over as they fell westward, which might seem surprising if I've got it right. I mean, that's the way it appeared to me, and I didn't actually do any official, looking at the compass or anything of that nature. I could just tell you that's an east-west road, and these trees were all laying down with their tops pointing westwardly, generally speaking. And what was so amazing is just to see all these large root structures from every single tree, sometimes side by side, 2, 3, and then one after the other. It's like rows of them almost. And at the east end of it, there is an older farm property there on that same side of the street. And it appeared to be unscathed. It was almost as if the wind came right over that low farm and right into those trees and just knocked them over like a mega bowling ball, just taking down all the pins. And so then, there was just so much devastation in terms of the forest right there. And the camera really can't, at least from the ground, from a drone, you could probably get a much better idea. But from the ground level, there's just so much green, the ferns, the stumps, the trees, all those same kind of camouflage colors. Everything becomes camouflaged itself that you lose a clear distinction of just how many objects are laying down. And On the outskirts of that alleyway where the trees do stand, um, on the south side, running along like almost like a border of the forest now, there are several trees that are just leaning into each other. They didn't fall over altogether, but they leaned up against the branches of a neighboring tree, kind of like toothpicks all just kind of collapsing upon each other, but still standing somehow. So that really, really left an impression. And that is just that patch of ground. There are several stories of people living on properties or near properties where the forest came down. There's a woman on Instagram, I didn't hear back from her rather, who was posting on Instagram saying she had woods around 4 sides of her home, and on 3 sides, the forest is gone. And that resulted also in a lot of cleanup effort, and I imagine at quite some expense too. And I think, judging by her posts, there were people who were chipping in to help with the lift and the cleanup effort, but no simple task. That's something that takes a long time to recover from. So wish I could have had a chance to interview her. Speaking of interviews, I did interview 2 people, one on camera and one off camera. When you go OK Mill Road to that area with all those trees down that I described a moment ago, if you go a bit further up the road going east, OK Mill Road turns into South Carpenter Road. And just after it does so, there's a church, I think it's called Forest Glades Church, or something similar to that. It's on the right or south side as you head east, a beautiful little white church. And near it, on the adjacent property, there's at least one large tree down, and there are tree branches down on the church property, crushing the fence alongside the road, the church fence. And across the street, there are trees down, big trees down on. Now we get into some large type of rural residential / farm properties. And there was a young man who showed up, and he asked, he just started making small talk with me, and he agreed to do an interview with me because he was describing what it was like. As he said, all these trees were, he said, it was all at once, they were all just bent over, and it wasn't even raining yet. And then for about 10 seconds, you could just hear them falling. And he described living up in that general area very dramatically what it was like. So he agreed to do an on-camera interview. And he has a wife and 2 small children. He told me the whole story from that he experienced at home. So that was a really good interview, which we shared in a video that I did a live stream when I came home that night. And I played that video as well as all the B-roll, the shots of the church, and also back on OK Mill Road with all those large trees down. So we did that. And then across from that church, there's a farmer. He showed up and he was listening to the tail end of the interview that I was doing outdoors there near the church parking lot. And the old timer, he told me that off camera, he didn't want to go on camera, but he said he's lived up in that neighborhood. That's how he put it, neighborhood, that he's lived up there since, I think he said 1966. In fact, I know he said 1966. And on that particular patch of ground, that farm across the street from the church for 40 odd years. And he said he's never in his entire life seen anything like what happened with the bomb cyclone. So again, that bomb cyclone term was one I was not apt to use initially until meteorologists on Seattle TV were explaining that it's actually an official term, kind of more of an informal term than the actual official term, but nonetheless bomb cyclone. And had some reservations about just how bad this was. But as the days and even more than a week went by after the weather event, it became really clear that this was unusual, highly unusual. And it's my hope that the weather experts, whether it's with the Weather Service and or local universities, that they analyze all that data and maybe even produce some sort of 3D topography animation where they can show exactly how these local, like almost micro weather events occurred, because obviously we had this storm system coming off the Pacific, so that's west to east, but we had, it appears, as part of that cyclonic motion or coming off of the mountains, perhaps rebounding. I don't know. I'm not a weather expert. But we had, in this particular case, something that appeared to be coming from the east going west. So it would be really interesting to see where this storm literally just dug out and removed and dug into areas of western Washington, to include Snohomish County, to include definitely up in Whatcom County, There's some devastation there in North King County. Friends and coworkers that I have down in the Olympia area said they really weren't impacted down in Thurston County. Anyway, were you impacted? Feel free to leave a comment or put something in the chat, and I'd love to hear about it. So part of the reason I've been busier too is recently got a new camera. I got a camcorder, Canon XA60, and it's been fun to shoot with and grow into. I use some of the Canon cameras at work during my day job, and so I'm familiar with the XA line of Canon cameras. When I used to work in another area of my employer for 10 years, I worked in communications prior to where I'm at now. And near the end of that 10-year period, I got a Sony PXW Z90, which I really liked. Recommended it to my friend Christian Sasse up in British Columbia, bald eagle photographer, physicist, and astronomer. And he got that camera. He really likes it. It still holds up really well, the Canon PXW Z90, but that's not what I have. I got the Canon XA60, and it's been enjoyable to go out and shoot, and I've been more productive with it. I also shoot for stock video, which I upload and make available for sale on pond5.com. And it's been fun to be out there with the camera, and the audio system that I'm working with. Wireless microphones continue to evolve in a really fun way, especially affordability and small form factor. So understand I started working with television gear, cameras and microphones and stuff back in the 80s. So it's been fun to see how things have evolved, and some recent investments in the audio area worked out great. So when I did the interview with a young man up on South Carpenter Road during the wind event, and he described that night, he was mic'd, I was mic'd, and everything sounded great. Only a few years ago when I was on Periscope, I thought it was a real big deal when I was able to mic my friend Christian Zasse and myself, each wearing Sony UWP-1 wireless microphones, and streaming from my iPhone, I forget which, probably a 7 Plus or earlier at that time. And we had audio from both of us, and I had a little something I plugged into the iPhone and then the mics into that thing. So it would allow that to happen. It was very uncommon, but now it's really easy given and affordable to get some new toys that will make using your phone and more than one microphone all doable, so that the people ultimately watching, whether it's live or playback later, video on demand, everybody can be heard well. And I'm really grateful for that. One of the things, though, about things getting smaller, that I do have to confess that with smaller camcorders, and I've also done video with a DSLR in the past, what I do miss from the old TV days was because I shot full-time as a reporter my first 4 years in television, so 87, 88, 89, 90, shot a lot of sports and a lot of news, but especially a lot of Friday Night Football and other sports up and down the sidelines. I do miss the big cameras form factor for when I want to be on the shoulder to follow action, especially with the Zoom Rocker. The Zooms were really nice, and I like cameras where I can switch over to autofocus and not have to mess with aperture. Still have auto aperture. Don't want to get too deep into the camera settings talk, but I do miss a large camera on the shoulder. And I think one day I'd like to get something. I know Blackmagic makes a broadcast type camera that has caught my eye. Maybe one day that'll be possible. That would be fun to shoot. Wildlife, news, breaking news. I could definitely see how fun that would be and applicable. And there's just the convenience of how that all worked together. When I first got onto television, there were not cameras like today with chips. They were tube cameras. They were Ikegami cameras, and you had a separate pack that you wore over your shoulder with the deck. And we put these big tapes in there, and then you had to put a big old light on a camera and wear a light belt. And then you also had a bag with backup batteries for the deck and backup brick batteries for the camera. These batteries were huge. And I used to, for example, shoot a lot of wildlife stories, even going back to the 80s, especially I started my career in Wenatchee when I had a TV station. I don't think it does now. Not one of the main networks anyway. and then a Yakima. And I used to do a lot of stories with Washington State. What is it now? Department of Fish and Wildlife. And so stories like peregrine falcon reintroduction, bighorn sheep inoculation, peregrine falcon reintroduction, Dolly Varden fish survey, bull trout, all up in the mountains. And so I would carry elk surveys from a helicopter. So I would carry all this gear. I mean, it was like going to the gym and backup tape, the bag with all those backup batteries, tapes, and so on. And of course, your reporter pad and pen. So things have come a long way, but I do miss the big camera. I do. No doubt about it. So just checking the chat here. Nothing coming into the chat. Well, it's okay. Maybe if I continue to do this, make it more of a habit, people can count on a place to come and chat and catch up and share stories and ideas. And certainly appreciate your feedback on what you're seeing on this channel and where we can take it. Beyond 90 Seconds. The idea was when Beyond 90 Seconds was first dreamt up, I guess, for a title. It's many years ago, back prior to 2010. I think it was 2007, 2008. It was because I had been working for 20 years as a news reporter. And back in those days, I get I'd be live in the field. The anchors would take 10 seconds to introduce me. I get 10 seconds, 15 seconds to say a few words and then go to the package with that minute 10 tape, telling the story with the pre-recorded audio and editing, come out on the other side at the end and wrap up in 10 seconds or so. And you'd be done in 90 seconds. And so I had some time on my hand at one point because I turned down the opportunity to renew a television contract without certain conditions being met. Those conditions were not met. It was a standoff. And so I didn't keep working in television after that. And I was holding out for a job at that time, the University of Arizona. Waited months. So I was very busy blogging and doing Beyond 90 Seconds investigative news. And there were some big stories back then that I did on the blog and broke some news. I won't get into all those. Maybe that's another live stream for another time. But as dynamic and productive as I was for those several months, ultimately the job at the University of Arizona was not filled. And it was, like I said, 2008, and the economy tanked, and the positions were not being filled as a result. So that ultimately led to a decision to come back to Washington State, be near family and so forth with my immediate family. And my wife and I are local. Back up here, we're both from this area. So we have, the kids have grandparents available in their lives, and we have our parents and so forth. So it's been real nice for those reasons. But that's where Beyond 90 Seconds came from. It was more, at the time, long-form journalism. And then as I got busy with kids again, and because it was my second set, my first two were from my first marriage. They're all grown up now. And now for my second marriage, I've got a 13-year-old and a 16-year-old. So, but between that and a full-time job and so on, there hasn't been a lot of time afforded for much investigative journalism, but kept the name and have oftentimes gone longer than 90 seconds as I've shared outdoor adventures with you, as well as some breaking news over the years, still here in Washington State. And I think you could hear my dog out there perhaps just now. Maybe not. Bo, he was just barking. So I think I'm going to wrap it up here, you guys. We've been going for 24 minutes. Appreciate the opportunity to check in with you. If you're watching the replay and you made it this far, thank you very much. If you have any suggestions for the channel, please leave a comment. And let me know whether you'd like to see more of these live streams where we can have the opportunity to chat, talk, catch up, and maybe hash out a few topics. All right. Thanks for watching. Take care, everybody. So long.